Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2158 would permit beekeepers who meet certain requirements to sell packaged honey and honeycombs without holding a food establishment or food processing plant license. In the House version of the bill, under the requirements for a beekeeper to be exempt from licensure, the bill lists a number of things, but it also includes the beekeeper's annual gross sales from honey and honeycombs do not exceed $50,000. And if a beekeeper meets all of the requirements except the limit on annual gross sales, they could obtain a food processing plant license without having a commercial kitchen facility. Under the Senate version, beekeepers who wish to sell honey or honeycomb for sale or resale at a retailer and who meet the similar requirements would be required to register with the Department of Agriculture at no cost, and they would also be exempt from licensure if they meet similar requirements. One of the differences is the package would have to include a disclaimer that the honey was not subject to routine inspection by the Department of Agriculture. The annual gross sales limit was reduced from $50,000 in the House version to $25,000 in the Senate version. And any beekeeper that qualifies for registration would not be required to acquire or maintain facilities or equipment for temperature-controlled food items, including a commercial kitchen.
And can you tell us what the Senate changed?
Yes, so they would require registration with the Department of Agriculture. They changed the annual gross sales limitation from $50,000 to $25,000. They would require a disclaimer on the label that the honey was not subject to routine inspection by the Department of Agriculture. And any beekeeper that qualifies for registration would not be required to have a commercial kitchen.
Okay, so on the registration, is it only if they are over 25,000 they have to register, or all of them have to register?
Any beekeeper who wishes to sell honey or honeycombs for sale or resale at a retailer would be exempt from the licensing requirement, but they would be required to register with the department if they meet the requirements. And the requirements are the same as they were under the House version, except the beekeeper's gross annual sales from honey and honeycomb could not exceed $25,000.
So if they're under 25,000, they don't have to register?
No, they still would have to register.
Okay. So would you guys be able to explain your thought process behind that? Having everybody read, because currently I don't think they're registering. They just can't sell in a store.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. They currently do not register if they are a small beekeeper, and as it came over from the House, that requirement was not in the bill. That was a committee amendment. I can't tell you why it was put in because I didn't support it, but the committee, there were more. I was told that there was a compromise reached with the department who was an opponent. However, the compromise, from my understanding, was only reached with the department, not the proponents of the bill. So the senator that offered the amendment thought that it would be good for the department to know who these beekeepers were so they could communicate with the beekeepers regarding minimum sanitary standards and packaging, was my understanding and my recollection. So that it sort of touches on the registration part.
Okay, so go ahead.
Senator Ware may have an additional comment on that topic.
Actually, just to clarify, I'm hoping that the revisor can tell us, this is for beekeepers that want to sell retail. If they're at the farmer's market, face-to-face with their customer, this doesn't apply?
So the language in the bill is any beekeeper who wishes to sell honey or honeycombs for sale or resale at a retailer.
Okay. And so I have talked to several of the proponents on the bill, and they're not real big on the bill anymore, obviously. So I would ask that we not have to register and that we move the 25,000 back to 50,000.
Mr. Chairman, on the 25,000 or 50,000, on our side, the discussion was there would be a lot of honey would have to be sold before it would reach the 25,000. So, and we'll discuss your offer, but I didn't know if there was a reason particularly that the 50,000 figure, other than that's what came over from the House that you were offering.
We discussed that in Commerce when we were negotiating the bill, and we thought that was a better number. And the reason was we asked the opponents of the bill, I asked them, one of them, so what is the problem with the bill? And which one of these gentlemen behind you are going to compete with you in your local stores? And he turned around and he pointed at two of them. And I said, okay, well, that explains it. So they're just wanting to limit, if you can only sell $25,000 worth, that's not a whole lot, so we changed it to 50. I think 50 might have been the, Representative Turk.
If I recall, 50,000 was the threshold for commercial licensing, and it was our intent to level the playing field for the little Bs when competing with the big Bs. The big Bs like that threshold because that's what separated the two. It was our thought that, well, let's make it fair. So 50 is across the board.
Representative Clayton.
It is worth noting that this change was not unanimous.
So, okay, I was going to say we'll talk, but we'll let Senator Ware address the conference committee before we back up and discuss this.
Okay, just one thought that $25,000 generally would equate to 2,500 pounds of honey, and that would be a very large operation in itself, was probably the bulk of the thinking there, I think.
So to reiterate, Mr. Chairman, your offer is to go back to the House position on the dollar amount and remove the registration requirement, correct?
Yes, correct, for anything under 50,000 only.
Okay.
And we'll accept all your other changes. They were good changes. And we're going to run up and make a quick vote while you negotiate that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the time. We are still debating. We have a variance of opinions on your offer, and so we're hoping to come to an agreement amongst ourselves pretty quickly here. But I just thought I'd let you know. I didn't want you to be over there hanging, wondering, what are they talking about? We were talking about your tie.
This is one of my favorites. Thank you very much for noticing. I picked out a special for you today. There was one more thing I wanted to mention. The Department of Agriculture asked that we also insert something in the bill that says that they would like all the hives to be in Kansas to make sure that they're not, if we made this change to 50,000, that they would not, they wanted to make sure that all the honey was born, or whatever it's called, in, I don't know, do bees give birth to honey?
No, that's not how that works.
If the hives are in,
The hives are in the state of Kansas and the production. Yes.
and so on that topic, before we get back to the other, do you have some language, or it was a conceptual?
That's just conceptual.
Mr. Chairman, our revisor on page 2, line 4, I'm sorry, line 8 through 10 already covers that. Honey or honeycombs originated or located in the state of Kansas when such honey or honeycombs were harvested. So it looks like you're thinking already along the lines of a senator to our side.
Yeah, thanks for accepting that.
We'll hopefully come to an agreement here pretty quick.
Senator, they're voting. We're going to run back up again and give you a few more minutes.
Okay, we've got a counteroffer is what I'm going to call it, Mr. Chairman, and that would be to remove the registration requirement, but drop the dollar figure down to 35,000 from your 50 up from our 25. And my understanding is currently, or with the legislation as we passed it on the 25, they would have to be licensed. And so this would bump it up to 35 before they would have to be licensed to sell retail, or sell wholesale that could be sold retail. So again, we're removing the registration requirement and meeting you not quite halfway on the dollar amount.
Okay, so you'll accept the House position with the exception of 35 instead of 50. And so the 35 up to what? And not more than what?
Not to exceed 35,000.
Up to what? What's your highest number?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
0 to 35.
0 to 35, there's no registration. They can
Yeah, okay.
licensing. But when they get to 35, they would need to be licensed with the department, is my understanding from what we were discussing amongst ourselves with our revisor.
Representative Clayton.
So I have a question. So this is above 35. Would this be licensing or registration?
The registration would be removed. This would be licensing. And I have a question for our staff. If they are licensed, then they do have to have, I'm going to use the word commercial kitchen, which was not really the words we used, but if they were at that and licensed, then they would have to meet the requirements on the kitchen facilities is what I'm going to call it, and then you can get to better words. But
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there is an exception for beekeepers if they meet all of the requirements listed, kind of starting on page 1 in line 25 and going through page 2, line 21, with the exception of the gross annual sales, that they would not be required to acquire or maintain those special kitchen facilities.
I have a quick question for the revisor. I thought in the House Commerce, we removed all commercial kitchens for anyone that made raw honey. So there would be no one would be, as long as that's all they did. But if they mix things with it, then they do.
So in the House version, any beekeeper who met all of those requirements except the $50,000 limit on gross annual sales could obtain the license without having the commercial kitchen facility.
is there a level at which they are required to obtain a commercial license or a license? You're saying they could obtain a license without having the commercial facility up to 50 in the House version. This is a little hard to track for some of us.
So if they met all of those requirements but still exceeded the $50,000 in the House version, they could obtain a license without having a commercial facility.
It was my understanding that we made that commercial kitchen exclusion for any beekeeper that made raw honey only, no matter how much sales.
Yes, you removed the sales requirement. They would still have to meet the requirements such as they're packaged on the property, they have certain labeling requirements. The beekeeper keeps the honey unaltered, the hives are in Kansas, and they maintain records. The beekeeper would still have to meet all of those requirements in order to obtain the license, they just wouldn't have to be under the $50,000 gross annual sales.
Thanks.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we're still at the 35,000, but that would just change the dollar amount. We're not going to require registration because my understanding is they can be licensed no matter how little amount of honey they sell. That was my understanding from our revisers. So if they want a license with the department, they can do that if they sell $100 worth of honey. But the kitchen requirement comes in at the dollar amount, is my understanding. I want to make sure I'm clear, but because we're kind of still stuck on the 35,000 and no registration. Other than that, we're just trying to make certain that we're not burdening, I'm trying to make certain we're not burdening our small beekeepers. All honey is raw honey for our small guys. They just take it out of the hive, put it in a jar, sell it. So I guess what we're, if you will, squabbling over is it 50 for you or 35 for us? And so we've moved off of our 25 to 35. And you've requested removing the registration for everyone, which we've agreed to that.
All right, we'll take it. Wrap it up.
Okay, so Senator Ware has a question or comment.
Comment, really. Since we're talking about food, and it absolutely is a public safety thing, just a registration, a simple, no-cost registration seems like not much to ask. I think that would be appropriate. It's not, it's, you know, there's not some heavy-handed, overbearing, you know, oversight thing going on, just a recognition that they're there, producing food, and I think it's important. Just a registration, no cost.
And that, Mr. Chairman, is where the discussion came in and the division in the committee came in, the full committee as well as the conference committee. But it sounds like we've got an agreement that's workable for the majority of us. I would ask, is there going to be, I'm going to ask the conferees, is there going to be any difficulty in signing a conference committee report? So we're going to need to run an agree to disagree, apparently. Okay, so we need to run an agree to disagree.
Okay, do we both have to do, are you going to need an agree to disagree too, or? Yeah. Yes, yeah, okay, cool. We'll get her done. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your work.
Thank you for your patience.